Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and today my guest is Emily Gerde. Emily and her husband, Justin, son, Wyatt, 3 cats, and 1 dog live in a 325 square foot tiny house on wheels. Emily is the author of Minimalist Living for a Maximum Life, which provides insights on their tiny house journey and how a minimalist, organic, holistic, mindful lifestyle led to a life of their dreams. Emily will be speaking at the Colorado Tiny House Festival June 22nd through 24th and will continue to move the tiny house movement forward with a passion for sustainable, mindful living. Emily Gerde, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all that you're doing for the movement. And so I'm just so honored to be on. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So you have a 325 square foot tiny house, which that might be the biggest tiny house that I personally know someone now who's living in it. So what is unique about your tiny house and how did it get to be that large?
Yeah, so we went with 325 square feet because we are planning on having more kids. So the plan is we developed it so that we could grow into it instead of having to, start small and then grow bigger. So we were like, you know what, let's just have this for a lifetime. So that was kind of where that came from because we will either have 2 or 3 kids plus all the pets. We want to make sure our cats had a place to sort of like get away from our toddler and kind of have their own little stoop and make sure we have a black lab. So it's a pretty big dog and we want to make sure that everyone just felt comfortable, and we wanted to kind of show the world that tiny house living can be luxurious because we felt that, the more we can prove that, the more people will be willing to kind of go this sustainable route. So that was kind of our vision from the beginning, is because the people we were surrounded with in the Midwest and middle class, it was kind of like, let's convince them that sustainability is awesome and also comfortable. So that was kind of our vision when we started. And since then, it really shifted. We were actually going to sell our tiny house, live in a 250 square foot camper. But after living in our camper for a couple months, we decided that was the worst idea ever. And we decided to keep our tiny house because we were just, it had everything. And without the lofts, it just wasn't working for our family. The lofts really provide that space to sort of, feel like you're in your own room. So yeah, that's been our journey. It's been exciting and there's nothing against campers. It just doesn't work for our family.
And what was it that the camper was going to allow you to do that you couldn't do with the tiny house?
So our tiny house is 20,000 pounds. It's wood frame. We started building in 2015. So we were kind of on this, there wasn't as many options. We didn't even know steel framing was a thing. So that was sort of like, okay, well, we'll do wood frame. And so that we just can't have a truck that big. It wouldn't make sense because I homeschool. So we go to a lot of activities. So I was like, I am not driving around this like $100,000 truck just to pull our house a couple times a year. So that was sort of our vision with the campers, like, oh, we can totally just pull it with the truck we have and we can, travel all these festivals. And we're still going to keep the camper and do that for the festivals. But the long-term living in it is just, it's not the best for us.
I mean, that totally makes sense. And when people ask, and I'm sure you get asked, why not just have a camper? I'm sure you can attest to both the layout of the space, but also the insulation and just the way campers are designed and built aren't really designed to support full-time living.
Oh, correct. Absolutely. We actually are suffering from some mold issues because we were in Minnesota. It was, negative 10 degrees or, between 20 degrees and negative 10 degrees. And we were in it all winter. And yeah, moisture everywhere, no matter what we did, you just, and we also had a slide out so that, especially around the areas in the slide out, and it had carpet. Our tiny house does not have carpet. So we have to really disinfect and get the mold out all of our camper because we're suffering from, allergies and colds and just icky stuff because, like you said, they're just really not meant for cold weather and they're not really meant for long term. So we're kind of trying to figure out how we're going to clean out that camper so that we don't get poisoned every time we go to sleep in it when we travel.
Maybe summer only.
Yeah, exactly.
I've also heard that, putting a small wood stove in a camper is great because it dries everything out so well. So if you are going to be in there in the winter, maybe a wood stove.
Yeah, exactly. And I know Macy Miller and some other amazing people have renovated their campers and added the insulation. So campers are definitely awesome and doable. We already had the tiny house. So we're like, why would we renovate a camper when we have this beautiful tiny house? So we just kind of were like, we'll just go back, and who knows where the future will lead. Down the road, we're hoping to build a tinier tiny house that actually can travel. So, we're thinking like steel frame 16-footer and just travel around the country in that. And so there's so many options. That's the beauty of tiny house living.
Yeah, I mean, Macy and her partner, 2 kids and a Great Dane, are doing it in a tiny little camper.
Yeah, it can't be big because they're just pulling it with like your average SUV. So yeah, they're amazing. Follow them if you haven't already.
Yes, and Macy was actually my first guest on the show, so she's all the way back at episode 1.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing what you're doing because I know when I built the tiny house, I registered quite a bit of judgment and comments of kind of like, oh, this isn't permanent. If you ever want to grow a family, this isn't going to work for you. And I'll admit that I didn't design the tiny house for more than 2 people. I kind of saw it as, if I ever do go in that direction, I will be building another tiny house, something a little bit bigger, something that can support a family. So I'm sure that you face some judgment and some scorn, but I'm curious, what do you tell people when they say, oh, how could you possibly live in a tiny house with a family?
Oh yeah, we definitely got that, especially, friends and family were like really concerned, and rightfully so, right? It's new, it's different. I like to tell, I'm a former first grade teacher. I'm a licensed teacher. I also am a daycare provider. So when I got my daycare license, the rule for square footage was in Minnesota at the time, I'm not sure what it is now, but it was 35 square feet per child to run a daycare. So I figured my tiny house definitely had more square footage than that per person. So I was not really concerned about it. And I also like to use the analogy of kids are in a classroom all day long. And obviously classroom size varies, but in general, they're less than 500 square feet or 800 square feet. I couldn't say exactly, but when I was teaching, I can tell you having 31 first graders in this tiny room, and then you got to remember you got all the desks. I mean, it's not, they can barely turn around half the time. And so, I just like to kind of use that analogy. And I also tell people, obviously tiny house living, the whole point is to get outside, to explore the community, to get, just be out of your tiny house. The tiny house is home base, but really the whole point of the movement is to like get out and build community and be outside and explore. So that's kind of what I like to tell people when they're nervous about having kids, is that you got to remember you're going to have all this extra money. We got rock climbing passes. We go camping all the time. We go to the library. There's so many free community resources out there. So that's kind of where I like to encourage people who are thinking about it, that there's so many options and there's so many indoor playgrounds, and there's just, you make it work. And we don't feel claustrophobic, but I know some families do. So I always tell them, don't worry, there's tons of free places to go.
Absolutely. And that is a wonderful thing about tiny house living, that it does just force you out into the community, into your outdoor surroundings, and it just makes you more connected with what's around you because you just can't hide in your house all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And we definitely did that in the big house, which was our number one motivator. Is we're like, oh my gosh, we like don't do anything. We just like sit every night and like do yoga, then watch movies, and then go to bed. And it's like, there's got to be some, like, we didn't even know like half our neighbors, right? So it's like, we got to do something different. I want community.
Exactly. So you just moved from Minnesota to Colorado. Did you move the house from Minnesota to Colorado, or did you move first and then build the house?
So we started our tiny house in 2015. We've already been living it in Minnesota for over 2 years. So we've just been living in backyards, and that's been fine for us. But we sort of hit our limit with that, as much as we've had amazing people like help us out, and it's been wonderful. And we've been doing yard work and gardening and animal care to help bring our rent down. And it was a wonderful experience, but we just kind of are ready for something new. It's kind of just feels good to have your own schedule and not feel like you have to, be at a certain place because you owe someone something, or, you're just kind of always a little timid and you kind of feel like you're walking on eggshells, and not to the fault of anyone else, but just because it's not your property. So we moved to Colorado in our camper, and we are currently in a backyard with another amazing family, and our tiny house will be here within 2 weeks. And then we will, because we were at the whim of whenever our driver could get it out here. So we will be back in our tiny house in 2 weeks, and we will start trying to legalize communities so that we have a place to stay finally.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned in your bio that your plan is to build tiny house communities. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we are working with a board of directors, and we have about 8 or 9 of us, and we are just really strategizing right now, building business plan, building a PowerPoint presentation. I'm getting builders and tiny house enthusiasts from all over the state to come and join us, and we're going to basically come as a unified front and start just go county to county and come together and say, hey, like, this is an option for not only affordable housing, but a lot of these counties have, green initiatives, and like, what is more green than this? And so we're just sort of like, right now we're in the phase of just kind of collecting data. So we have a bunch of surveys out all over the internet, and just really, for those of you who haven't seen Living Tiny Legally, I really highly recommend it. It gave us a lot of direction on where to go. And we're also working with the American Tiny House Association. They're potentially going to send out like a trainer. So there's a lot of options, but right now we're basically in data collection to show the local municipalities that this is worth it. This is going to benefit them financially, because that's, the bottom line when it comes to these, they want to make sure their constituents are feeling comfortable and feeling like they will benefit. So that's kind of where we're at, is just data.
That's awesome. Does that initiative have a name yet?
No, not as of yet. We have a meeting actually tomorrow to sort of like iron out the kinks and stuff. But yes, I'll definitely keep you posted, and we can, once it has like a name and a vision, we can certainly, because we're just working on the business plan now. So we will certainly keep you posted.
Yeah, please do. I'll try to link out to that in the show notes when it's ready.
As far as gathering people, though, we do have a meetup group, Denver Tiny House Enthusiasts on Meetup. So that's kind of where we bring all the builders, all the vendors, all the people, and people who are living or want to live, vans, buses, yurts. We just bring everyone together, kind of as again, as like this unified force of it's time for change. So that's one place you can find us.
That's awesome. And speaking of Denver and Colorado, you're speaking at the Colorado Tiny House Festival on June 22nd to the 24th. I'm curious, what are you speaking about?
Yeah, they basically just want me to talk about our lifestyle, basically our story. I'm a big believer that just, it's kind of like a Native American culture kind of thing, where it's like people, by telling your story, you're inspiring others. So we just sort of don't have an agenda with it. We're more just telling, here was our reasonings, here's how it played out, and here's, some what has happened since. So just kind of laying it out for people, and really just focusing on family, because I'm one of the few that are speaking that has family in a tiny house. So it focuses, which again is our story. So we're just focusing on why it works for a family. And so we'll see how it goes. I'm excited. And I think we even have time for questions. So, during that time, it might sort of shift. And I'm also on a specific family panel. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. I'm excited.
That sounds great. I'm curious, because you did mention that your house is designed to be your forever home with a family. And I'm curious what you envision as your kid or kids get a little bit older and, maybe 10, 11, 12, bordering on teenage years. How does the space support that?
Oh, I absolutely love that question. It's in my book as well. I talk a lot about that because we all know, we've all been teenagers, right? We know how it feels. We want our own space. We need privacy. We want to have autonomy. And we, our parents end up being, ew, gross, and we're boring or whatever, whatever teenagers think about their parents. And so yeah, when we are definitely starting to like save up and we're going to have our son or potentially more kids, we'll be building them their own tiny house or renovating a camper. So they have their own space. And being that we plan on unschooling or homeschooling, we also have that benefit of the fact that he will be able to, be home, and sort of we're going to teach him life skills. So things like, cooking for himself and laundry and cleaning and just basic self-care, like how, budgeting, all this cool stuff. So having him move out around age 13, 14, or whenever, he feels ready, that would be a great opportunity, because I know my husband and I always giggle that we were so unprepared going to college. Like I could like make spaghetti and that was like it. So it'll be really fun to see him sort of blossom into this young adult, and, his future wife will be like, oh yes, he actually knows how to do stuff. This is great.
He'll be the complete package, a man who can cook and clean.
Right.
That's awesome. And that's, I think, what Andrew and Gabriella Morrison did. Each of their kids had their own tiny house on the property that kind of was their own space.
Oh, wonderful.
So you mentioned your book, and I'd love to hear more about it. What is Minimalist Living for a Maximum Life?
Oh, man. It's kind of like, I kept it pretty short and sweet. I just wanted it to be kind of the intro book to this kind of lifestyle. And basically it starts off with our journey of why we went tiny house, how that kind of evolved. And it's really funny because I finished the book when we were still thinking of staying in our camper. And then, so if you read the book, just take that with a grain of salt. We did decide to keep our tiny house. We couldn't stay away from tiny house living. And then it kind of shifts into, because we were living tiny, we were able to kind of really focus on our health and our, mind, body, soul health. So it really kind of, the rest of the book kind of dives into ways that we have saved money and saved the environment at the same time. Because the tricky part with living a simple, healthy lifestyle is everything that's good for us tends to cost more. So we kind of have some tips and tricks on how to like downsize, how to buy organic food more affordably, how to clean more affordably and yet sustainably. So it really focuses on, just the whole idea of simple, sustainable, healthy living. So it was really fun, and I hope people enjoy it. It's been a great adventure.
That sounds wonderful. I'm curious what advice you have to those who maybe aren't ready to take the jump into living in a tiny house. Do you have to live in a tiny house to be a minimalist?
Oh, absolutely not. And I talk a lot about that in my book. I think the most important thing is to live within your means and live sustainably with the environment in mind. So I am not a square footage person. I know there's some people that are like, oh, you're not living tiny, you're not living minimalist. And I'm a big believer. I mean, if you have 8 kids, I don't expect you to live in 325 square feet. That's borderline like not healthy. And, you just have to kind of, everyone's an individual. Everyone has specific needs and wants. And the whole goal of this movement, and at least from my perspective, is we just want to show the world that, minimalism and sustainability is possible, and it actually makes you feel better. So whatever that means to you, maybe you go from a 3,000 square foot home to 2,000. Maybe you go from 2,000 to 1,000. Maybe you just make your 2,000 square foot home really non-clutter, and you try to get solar or geothermal, or, there's just so many ways to kind of go at this sustainability movement that I really kind of encourage people to just really do what works for your family, because we don't want everyone moving into a tiny house and then all of a sudden there's all these tiny houses for sale, right? Like we want to be prepared. So if you're thinking about it, I highly recommend getting into an Airbnb. There's so many hotels and tiny house hotels and Airbnbs out there right now, or talk to a local builder and actually step inside one. But I definitely recommend trying it out first and see if you like it. And otherwise, there's just so many yurts and earth ships, and there's just so many different options out there. Just definitely do your research is my advice.
So I have several friends and peers who are raising young children at the moment. And for some of them, when I envision the spaces that they live in, of course, they don't live in tiny houses, but the space that their 2-year-olds inhabit and all the toys and things that come along with that are probably as big as my tiny house. And so I'm curious, in your house, what percentage of that is dedicated to your son's, toys and things? And how would you advise? It's almost like you look around and you're like, it wouldn't be possible to have this kid in a tiny space because look at all the stuff that they need to play with, and the activity mat and the train set and the entire cabinet full of blocks and stuffed toys. What does that look like in your house?
Yeah, I love that question because it was definitely sort of this evolving epiphany for our family. I ran a daycare in our basement in our big house. So, oh my gosh, we had so many toys. Granted, they were all donated or used, or for the most part. So that wasn't too bad. We just kind of donated those or sold them or passed them on to friends and family. But now that he's 4, he definitely has some opinions about what toys he has. And he sees things on his, there's his favorite show right now is the Daddy and Axel show on YouTube, which is a great show, but they play with toys, but they play with toys outside. It's all about being outside, but they do play with toys because of course that's what kids like. And, every once in a while he'll ask for a new toy. So what we've learned is that every time he wants a new toy, he has to sell 1 or 2 old toys. So we're never actually accumulating more. And he actually really enjoys it. It's also teaching him money management. And it's really fun to see him. He doesn't get upset about it at all because he's like, oh yeah, I don't play with that anymore, whatever. So I think involving our kids in the process is one way to start. And when he was little, we did more of giving it to friends and family. But now as the toys actually have some value, some of these Legos are, $60 for the kit. And so now that they're holding value, we find ourselves, selling them, or, some of them aren't really worth selling. So then we donate to a local daycare or preschool or something or library. Actually, a bunch of our toys just went to sit with tiny house builders so that when the kids are there with their parents, the DIYers, then they have something to do. So yeah, we really, I don't know as far as percentage right now, it's a little bit, we have to do a big purge. We've kind of got, because all the travel and everything, it was kind of we got to get him through this 14-hour drive. So
right.
We got a lot of Lego kits. So, it kind of ebbs and flows, but basically, the philosophy is 1 in, 1 out kind of philosophy. And that's really been working for us. We enjoy it. And as far as the big things, that's been a little bit of a challenge, but we were able to get down to where we could fit he's got a battery powered 4-wheeler and 2 bikes. And we were able to fit that in the back of the truck with our bikes. And then that was kind of it for the big toys. And the train tables and stuff, all that kind of stuff, they have at libraries. They have them at Barnes and Noble. There's just so many ways to kind of get out and explore. And also when Christmas or birthdays or holidays roll around, we ask for experiences. So that's a huge movement in the parenting world right now, is that people don't want these plastic toys. They want experiences. So we kindly ask friends and family, if you're going to get us something, get us a camping pass or a pass to the zoo or the children's museum or, their science museum. There's just so many neat options out there depending on where you live. And we got rock climbing passes, gymnastics class, music class, karate. So that's kind of our vision, is we're really trying to minimize his toy intake and try to make it more family experience.
That's great. And that works for everyone across the whole family spectrum, no things, more experiences and less things. What is unschooling? Is it the same thing as homeschooling? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends on who you talk to. So as a licensed teacher, I guess I was actually behind the scenes and I saw how things work and I was a part of it, and I have a master's in education. So my whole life up until about 7 years ago was education. And, you just kind of, it works for some people. It doesn't work for other. For our family, our son is just a little bit, what would you say? Like he would be the kid that would constantly be told to sit down. And as a teacher, I didn't roll that way, which is why I actually stopped teaching because I got way too many glares and way too much, frustration from other teachers. Like, why are you letting your boys walk around? And I was like, well, because they're still learning. And they were actually ranked, like my class was ranked second out of 7 classrooms as far as academic achievement. And so then they got a little upset and it was just this whole thing. And so I was like, oh, we just got to try something else. So then we looked into homeschooling, and I really do enjoy homeschooling. We do kind of a mix because homeschooling is basically, you have a curriculum, you have a schedule, and you follow it. And as you can imagine with our new tiny house spirit, we're like, yeah, this whole schedule and curriculum thing really isn't working for our family because we go hiking, we go to the beach, we go rock climbing, we travel. It's just not really working for us. So unschooling is more like kind of student led. So we kind of say that every day is a teachable moment. So whatever it's whatever he's interested in. So if he wants to go biking one day, then, as we're biking, we notice things as we drive. We notice shapes. We notice colors. When we get there, we talk about, like we get to the skate park and we talk about like how it works and, momentum and force. And every day is just an opportunity to learn. So that's kind of how we approach our learning for now. And it'll change as he gets older and stuff. And the great thing about homeschooling and unschooling is that, once we get a community and we're paying taxes and stuff and we have a quote unquote address, we can actually be a part of the regular public school. So he can do phy ed and music and science there because those are things I personally don't excel in. I excel in phy ed, but I only did gymnastics. So it's like, I don't know how to teach him baseball or so he can take those classes there because we'd be paying the taxes for it. So then, that's a nice way to kind of still get that, feel of school, but also then the other stuff we can do at home.
That's great. So in regards to getting your own address and paying taxes, does that mean you're planning to buy land?
We are just planning to live on one of the communities that we build. This has been such an interesting journey because in Minnesota, we had our parents' address. That was just, we had our license. Everything was under my parents' address. Right. And we never lived at our parents'. Well, we lived there for a little bit, and then moving here, it was such a humbling experience because all of a sudden we felt homeless. We can't get mail. We can't get a PO. I think we can get a PO box if we use a different address, but as far as, we don't want to necessarily be sending our Amazon packages to a PO box every day, or it just was really humbling. We're like, oh my gosh, we can't even get a license. We can't, it's this whole new experience. So we're finding people to like host us and are willing to let us put their address so that we can get a driver's license switched over. And it just really made me kind of reach out to the homeless community. And here in Denver, there is a homeless community. And I went to the meeting and I'm kind of working behind the scenes with them and talking about future options. I spoke with a potential Denver City Council member and we're trying to do stuff behind the scenes. And I've always had a heart for the homeless, but this kind of almost made me feel homeless. And so I was like, wow, there are so many barriers that people have to overcome. And everyone's like, oh, they're so lazy and da-da-da. And, oh, they're all druggies. And in Denver, 60 to 80% of the homeless have jobs. And then we build them these tiny house communities. And the tiny house communities are only legal because they have to move every 6 months to a new location. So they literally have to spend thousands of dollars moving these tiny homes to a new location every 6 months.
That's awful. And you bring up a great point about that. And from what I've read and what I understand about homelessness, that having a home and a permanent location is so key in helping people turn their situations around. And you're getting a unique experience, getting to almost experience that issue firsthand. And I can see that it's really created new empathy that I'm sure you had on some level, but now that you've experienced it, it's so much more real.
Oh, you couldn't even believe the barriers. I mean, things as simple as a library card. Like, thank goodness this family offered to host us because we couldn't get a library card without an address. It's crazy. And how do you get a job if you can't go to a library and apply to jobs with the internet, right?
So one thing that I like to ask all of my guests are, what are 3 resources, could be books or podcasts or even movies or music, just 3 things that have inspired you on your tiny house journey that you'd like to share with others?
Whew, gosh, that's a tough one because there are so many amazing people out there. Well, I guess I'm just going to go with what initially got us excited because that's like kind of the most authentic because oh my gosh, I've done so much research since then. What initially got us excited about tiny homes was Kim Castle. She's a Minnesota local, and she let us go into her tiny house. And funny how the world works. I taught in the same school, and we were friends with her husband. So it was kind of hilarious that all worked out. And once I actually found her first and then found out she was married to him, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is way like small world. So Kim Castle, I think, oh my gosh, now I'm blanking on her website. I think it's Bless This Tiny House.
Okay.
And it's Castle with a K, Kasl. So she was kind of our inspiration because she let us, get into a tiny home. And hers, I think, is about 24 feet long. So it was also kind of this epiphany of like, we want a little bit longer than that. But she has 2 kids, 2 small dogs, her and her husband, in this tiny house. So they are definitely an inspiration for us at the beginning. And as far as, TV shows, we were actually on Tiny House Big Living. So we watched Tiny House Big Living on HGTV. And that really inspired us because it wasn't about drama. It wasn't about like all the crazy knickknacks. It was literally just following the build. So we petitioned to be on that show, and we got on, and that was a beautiful experience. And I still just really like that show because it's so real. There's no fakeness to it. There was no they didn't tell, there was no dramatization. It was just literally following our story.
Nice.
So yeah. And then Tiny House Magazine. Now I'm blanking. See this. Oh,
Kent Griswold.
Yeah. Yes. So that is really fantastic. He's doing a great job. And I know one just went in print as well. I haven't really been able to dive into that one, but yes, Kent Griswold, he does a great job. And I think I've been in there twice already. And just the people I see going through that magazine, it's just so real and authentic. And that's really important to me, is kind of that authenticity, and people, kind of, just present like, this is really how it is, instead of like, you see all these beautiful, like amazing staged photos, and it's like, I love those, but can I also see what it looks like when it's lived in?
Right. Yeah, no, Kent does a great job. All the articles are from people who live in tiny houses, they're not like paid writers who are writing these posts. They're real tiny house people.
Oh yeah. And he did such a great job of like helping, having questions that he kind of like guided me of like, hey, we haven't heard anything about this. Can you speak to this? And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, that's really good. And then the last one is my friend from Minnesota, Stephanie Cubes, and she is 2 girls and a tiny. And she is on like Facebook, Instagram, and whatever, but she's a single mom, and she was inspired by us to go tiny. And now I'm inspired by her because I have a heart for single moms. I can barely be a mother with a husband, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, you guys are angels. You're superheroes. Any single moms out there, like, you guys can do this. Tiny house living is a great affordable option. And she's out there doing it, and with her daughter, and I'm just so inspired by her because it's changing her life.
Well, those are great suggestions. Emily, Gerde, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to hear all the rest of your guests, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much to Emily for your time today. You can find the show notes for this episode, including links to Emily's recommended resources, at thetinyhouse.net/Emily. Are you enjoying the Tiny House Lifestyle podcast? If so, please take a moment to rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Your honest reviews will help others find the show. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please do. It's free and ensures you'll never miss an episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. And finally, if you're looking for the ultimate guide to planning your tiny house, check out my comprehensive resource, Tiny House Decisions. Tiny House Decisions is the guide I wish I had when I built my tiny house and comes in 3 different packages to help you get a jumpstart on your tiny house. Save hundreds of hours of research and thousands of dollars with Tiny House Decisions. Learn more at thetinyhouse.net/THD. We're offering a special discount for podcast listeners. Use the coupon code TINY to take 20% off any package. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/THD. Coupon code TINY for 20% off. That's all, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.